Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class from HowStuffWorks.com.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And you may remember our interview with artist and author Jason Porath from back in 2016 when he came by to talk about his book, Rejected Princesses.
He has another book. It's called Tough Mothers, and it's out now. And he was traveling around promoting it and was able to stop in our Atlanta studio.
Yeah, and we talked for a while because Jason is full of fun stories. So instead of giving this a lengthy intro, which he covers most of the ground we would cover in an intro anyway, let's just hop right into it. Hi, Jason Porath.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad I'm here.
It's bright and early. We're all a little sleepy still.
Yeah, we're a little punch drunk, so apologies already, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah. So we had you on before when you were promoting your first book.
Mm-hmm.
Your second book, Tough Mothers, is out.
Yes.
What's been happening since last time we spoke?
I've worked a lot.
I know. I've been lucky enough to kind of connect with you in various cities as we've both been traveling.
Popping up here and there.
But it is always kind of like I have a 42-minute window between going to this thing and this thing. Do you want to grab a drink/meal?
Yeah, even right now, I have like an hour to kill, and then I have to drive off to New Orleans where I'm going to the annual Librarian Association or American Librarian Association at an annual conference. So I'm hoping I just get to party with librarians. That's my jam.
I know other people who are going to that who are also cool, and so I think you'll have a great time.
Yeah.
All right, please. I actually know no one there, so please send me info on that.
Oh, having worked in the library sciences for more than a decade, I can tell you there's some... You will find fun parties.
I've never met a terrible librarian. I'm sure they exist, but do they go to conferences? I don't know.
No.
I'm going to find out.
I mean, to be fair, there are terrible people in every profession
That's
and
true.
delightful people in every profession.
That's true.
Probably the terrible people don't want to go be social at a conference.
Yeah, I've sort of came with the idea that if I go to a place and everybody seems really cool and there's a whole lot of them, there's got to be one terrible person. If I can't figure out who it is, it's probably me.
I just assume it's always me.
It's probably
And that's
me.
like the safest, easiest. I get to go in a little defensive, a little.
Yeah.
It works out perfect.
Yeah.
What else has been going on other than just never stopping?
God. So I've continued doing these sort of online web entries, but unlike the books, which are sort of, for those of you who don't know, this is a series about awesome ladies of history that almost nobody's ever heard of. I do occasional mythological or folklore, but it's primarily history. I do an illustration and then a write-up. The books are just, here's one picture that's like a poster of a movie that's never been made and likely never will be made, sort of in quasi-animated princess style, and then a write-up. For online, I've been doing this sort of like an illuminated manuscript with tons of illustrations, like an online webcomic kind of deal, which 10x'd, 20x'd my workload, which was a real bad call on my part, I tell you that. They're popular, but man, they're a lot of work.
Yeah, I feel like last time we talked, you were trying to figure out ways that you could streamline your process because you were already overloaded, and instead you kind of clunked it up in a beautiful way.
Yeah, it looks great, but man, I am a masochist. So there's at least a lot out there, and it's very effective, and I'll eventually figure out how to compile it together in a book and not have it cost $1 bajillion. But yeah, that's still TBD.
And at some point, you'll figure out how to manage your life so you could sleep.
Theoretically, yeah.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
or I'll just pass out in the middle of it. Who knows?
So Tough Mothers is out, and I know Tracy and I have both prepped some ones that we think might be fun to talk about. I also talked to you and got which ones were your favorites. So do you want to jump right in and talk about some Tough Mothers?
All right, let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. So if folks have not read this book, Holly and I actually blurbed this book.
True.
We had our praise. Our praise is in the book for this one. So that was exciting and something I was genuinely excited about doing because I love your work.
Oh, thank you. I love your work.
The first of these awesome mothers that we wanted to talk about today was Ada Blackjack, whose story is fascinating. So tell us about her.
So Ada Blackjack lived early 1900s. She was an Inuit woman, and she was not one of these folk who like lived with the tribes and whatever. She lived in a city. She wasn't like well-educated. She didn't really have a whole lot going for her. In fact, she had married a dude who was a really kind of terrible husband named Jack Blackjack. I know that's a huge surprise that a guy named Jack Blackjack wouldn't turn out to be father of the year. But yeah, alcoholic, left her with a kid. And so she's like a 19, 20, like early 20s. Doesn't have a lot of prospects. Her kid has tuberculosis, and she has to put him up in an orphanage. So things are not really going Ada's way at this point. Simultaneous to this, there is a movement by a whole bunch of very confident white guys to go claim a godforsaken rock about 200 miles north of Siberia for England. It should be noted at this point that a bunch of these guys who are out on this scientific expedition, scare quotes, had shipwrecked there years prior. There's this place called Wrangel Island, and had narrowly escaped from that. And they're like, you know what's a great idea? Let's go back and claim it for England. And that way it'll be like a vantage point for them to like mess with Russia or something. England didn't want this, by the way. England had absolutely no interest in this island. Their literal plan was, we're going to go there. We're going to squat there for a year. And that's like plant a flag, and we're going to get this island, and it'll be great, and England will love it. And they'll give us free license to become reindeer tycoons. Like they were going to just have a reindeer farm? Like, this was their legit plan. I'm not making this up. It was not a good plan.
It's a bizarre thought process from the beginning. Like, we shipwrecked on this island and it was awful. What if we went back and made it ours now?
Yeah. So there were four of them that were being financed by this guy with an unpronounceable Nordic name, Vilhelmur Stephenson. I apologize. I can't pronounce that name. It's a lot. So Stephenson, let's go with Stephenson. He has these four like guys, two of whom were like fresh out of college. They were like 19 and 20. The other two had a little bit of experience with him, and one of them, it's heavily hinted, had like crazy PTSD from being shipwrecked on Wrangel Island before, and he was going back to like settle things within himself. So already
so many problems.
There's so many problems.
I'm still back on picturing England going, can I return this gift for store credit?
Well, England didn't know they were doing it. They got a couple of the people who were going with them. The part of the four were Canadian citizens, and thus like part of the Commonwealth, and like they were going to the whole thing was just. It was a bit of a mess. Moreover, there was a lot of question over like, is this Russian property? Is this like U.S. Alaskan property? Like who owns what? And they were basically like, hey, let's go cause an international incident. So,
I got time.
Moreover, as if this wasn't as bad an idea as it already sounds, the expedition. Stephenson had tricked a bunch of the people who were on the expedition saying, oh, yeah, we got plenty of funding. We got plenty of people behind it. I just talked to the Queen. She's great about it. So he'd already lied to a bunch of them. But he was also like, hey, let's just go with 6 months of supplies for a year. And we'll just hunt while we're there because the Arctic is super friendly. That was his brand. It's like, oh, yeah, the Arctic, totally fine. Right? And we'll just get a whole bunch of Inuit people, we'll hire them, and then they'll basically carry the day. So that was their plan. And they went up to Alaska, and they go on this hiring expedition, and nobody wants to get with these guys. Nobody. Except for Ada Blackjack. Ada having almost no prospects whatsoever, and like her friends are like, I don't know about these guys. She's like, well, I need to get medicine. My son's got tuberculosis and he's young, and like I need to be helping that out. And I got nothing else I can do. And so she signs up with them, and even they're like, oh, you're not a great fit. We're looking for like a traditional Inuit person, like the racist white people, attitudes. They wanted someone who could like make a skin boat and like could hunt and could sew and whatever. And she's like, well, I can sew a little bit. And they're like, fine, okay, we'll get more Inuit folk along the way. They did not get more Inuit folk along the way. So they end up tricking a boat captain to bring them out to Wrangell Island, refusing to tell this captain where they're going until they get there or why they're going. They just keep paying him money until he just drops them off. And he's like, what are these crazy people doing? And then as he's like going off, they don't even wait to plant the flag. So like the guy, as he's boating off, like looks at them through the periscope and the viewing glass, and he's like, oh, those stupid idiots. But he's still getting out of there because he knows winter's about to come, and there's like a 1 month window max where the ice is at that point with the technology in the boats where the boats could actually get through. So Guy gets out and spreads word that, and like international incident starts unfolding in the outside world while these guys are on this island. And so for like they get there and it immediately starts getting dark, and like this is so far north that there's literally like 61 straight days of consecutive darkness. Like it's just a bad idea. Ada Blackjack, having had never really left home, never really been far away, starts having severe mental health issues. And the idiot scientists, none of them have had any like medical training or psychological training whatsoever. And so they're like, oh, she's gone crazy. Let's mistreat her horribly. Yeah, no, the stuff they do is just infuriating. And they like lock her up outside and like insult her. I mean, they try for a little bit to like help calm her down at the beginning, but then they're just like, no, this isn't worth it, and like do all sorts of really just gnarly stuff. Eventually they calm down and they get into sort of a regular routine where they're hunting or whatever, and they make it to about a year with like minor injuries and whatever. And they have not done much science the entire time they're up there. And then they hit the 1 year mark and they're like, all right, great. The boat's coming back. We'll be fine. The boat does not come back. Stephenson had not been able to really put together his ducks in a row, and so it didn't have a boat coming. So he was like, nah, in the press, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. Like, the Arctic is friendly, remember? That's my brand. And so they go another year, and things go real bad. One of them, the guy who had been there before, who was really working out PTSD, he basically gets scurvy and doesn't tell anyone and just starts acting like an a-hole. Like, hey, he'd had scurvy before. You think you'd know, like, to tell someone. But he's like, no, I'm a man. I can deal with it.
Oh, dear.
It's so infuriating just reading all of this stuff. So basically, at a certain point, like mid-January, he can no longer walk. Ada is taking care of him. She has, at this point, like taught herself to trap, taught herself to hunt, etc. And the other guys are like, okay, well, we need to get out of here. We won't last until like the second year that the boat can get through at that one little juncture. So they're like, okay, we're gonna just get in the dog-pulled sleds, and we are going to sled to Alaska from this island because everything is ice and we're just going to walk to Alaska, essentially. And if that doesn't work, we're going to go to Siberia and then just find help. They're never found again. They just disappear and things go bad. So it's just her and this guy who is like the king of buttheads and has scurvy, and she's caring for him, and she keeps this dude alive for months and months and months. Meanwhile, he is insulting her in the worst ways. She'd had some kids like who had died in infancy and like miscarriages and stuff, and he says things like, "Oh, if this is the standard of care that you're providing me, no wonder your kids died," which is possibly the worst thing you could say to another human being.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I mean, not that I spend a lot of time thinking about like terrible things to say to people.
Where your threshold might be.
Right. But I struggle to think of anything worse that you could say to someone. But she keeps him alive. She like starts jury rigging up different things for shooting game and stuff because she's smaller than them. So like she needs to have like a gun rest and that sort of thing. She builds out an entire platform to look out for polar bears, which she's terrified of due to like her native upbringing. Like the Nanook was a deity that she was just terrified as a polar bear deity that was going to eat her. So all sorts of terrible things. She keeps him alive for months and months and months. He finally succumbs, and she spends months alone with just her and the ship's cat, whose name is Vic. They called him Snoops because he was a Snoopy cat. And eventually, at the 2-year mark, the boat comes back, and she's the only one alive. And there's this guy named
Is Snoops also alive?
Snoops is also alive.
Okay,
Snoops
good.
makes it. There's photos of her on the boat with Snoops. Snoops makes it all the way. Snoops has a long and happy life. So yeah, she survives. Nobody else does. She's found by this expedition 2 years after they'd set off, and she's found by this guy Harold Noyce. Yeah, it's Noice. Noyce.
Perfect.
But he was not Noyce. So it gets worse. This is the thing. Like, just when you think, okay, it's good, she's in the clear, everything's cool, she's getting paid for it. No, it doesn't get better. So she gets to civilization, and she sells a bunch. She gets her money. She's for the expedition. She's got a bunch of furs from all the stuff that she's killed that she sells. Noyce actually is like, oh, I'll just take them off your hands and I'll pay you, and he pays her 15% when she would have gotten otherwise because he's awful. And she just hands over a bunch of the journals that the men had been keeping, including the guy who survived the longest, whom she'd been looking after. And so then she's just like, I don't want to deal with any of you reporters. All of you people are crazy. I'm going to go look after my son because that's the only reason I did any of this, and just nopes right out of there. Just heads off to the tuberculosis ward and takes all of her money and is just like, I'm getting treatment for my son. I'm getting reunited with my son. Yay. And is out of the public eye. What then immediately happens is that Noyce takes this journal, which he's supposed to hand over to Stephenson, the guy who'd financed the whole thing. And Noyce is like, wait, there's money here. There's life rights. There's movies and stuff to be made. But I need to spice it up. It isn't good enough. So he starts systematically erasing parts of it to make it look like Ada Blackjack was a prostitute and that the man had brought her along and she was a woman of ill repute. Sorry, I need to take a moment here just because I'm so exasperated how awful everyone is in this story. Ada's great, but man, every man in this story.
The moral of the story is that in Ada's life, the only thing she could trust was a cat.
Yeah, cat and her son.
Yeah.
So he starts making noises about oh yeah, well, she was fat and healthy when I found her, and had eaten all of the rations, and these men would have survived without her. Just increasing the terribleness of the story until word gets to her, and she gets on a train and goes, I forget if it's from the Pacific Northwest. I think she was in Seattle at the time. Goes all the way down to the LA Times, walks into the LA Times, gives an interview that basically burns the guy's story to the ground. She had befriended all of the men's families, all of the other people who were on the expedition, and they all loved her. They basically adopted her as family, and they all vouched for her. And she basically just destroyed this guy's career and then noped off to Alaska and lived to her mid-80s. Her son lived – he ended up getting meningitis. He was blind in one eye, tuberculosis, still lived to his mid-40s or 50s. She had another kid who didn't know any of this. All of this was a complete mystery to him, and just he kind of was this rebellious kid who's just oh, mom is so lame. I don't like her. Meh. And then only later in life did he realize, and he's still alive, how much she'd gone through. And then agitated for her to get a special recommendation from the state of Alaska, and she did. But the location of her grave and everything is anonymous because she was so sick of people coming by and interviewing her. She didn't want anything to do with any press for the rest of her life.
She's my ghost grants no interviews.
Yeah, she's I'm done. But yeah, her story's amazing. And she shows up in all sorts of newspapers and everything, early 1900s. But she has not shown up in any other form of media. The only thing that she's shown up in, and this really cheeses me off is that there's if you search the name Ada Blackjack, there's a clothing company. It's like expensive like leather hand goods or something operating out of Barcelona that appears to be like this random lady who's just like, oh, I was so inspired by her story. I'm going to make a bunch of leather handbags in her name. Like it's just this completely unrelated lady doing this and just taking her name. I'm like, really? Really?
Yeah.
You going to do that? I think she stopped a couple of years ago, but all the stuff is still up, so you still get a bunch of Google hits for it, which is just not okay.
Ada Blackjack's story is at turns exasperating and inspiring.
Yeah. Coming up, we are going to talk about a Japanese woman who spearheaded an education movement, but first we are going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about someone who kind of spearheaded some cool education stuff and also had a lot of stress and tragedy in her life, which is Stamatsu Oyama.
Yeah, she was the first Japanese woman to basically get a bachelor's degree, and she has this utterly fascinating story. So her story kind of starts at the very end of the Age of the Samurai. So there's like this huge battle that I think most people can point to as like the end of the Age of the Samurai, sort of the Meiji Restoration, which I'm sure you've talked a lot about that sort of stuff. But it's the Battle of Aizu Wakamatsu is this kind of the Western-backed forces of Japan versus the traditionalist samurai. And she was on the losing side. She was on the samurai side. And she was holed up in this Aizu castle and doing what women did in those days, which was they were getting shelled by cannons provided by Western forces, I believe. And her job was to provide ammunition for the gunners up on the walls. And if a shell came in, she was supposed to take a wet blanket and smother it and prevent it from going off. That's actually how her sister-in-law, Tosei, died. And so Tosei died and a bunch of shrapnel went off and it actually left a scar on Stamatsu's neck. It should be noted that her name was actually Sakiko Yamakawa at this point. I'll get into why her name changes throughout this. But she goes through many name changes. So Sakiko has lost her sister-in-law, has on the losing side of this battle of samurai, lost all the honor and everything, and her family, who's high up lords and whatever, are basically reduced to they're trying to look after all of these people who were their vassals, but were on the losing side and don't have a lot of food to go around or whatever. And so the forces who won, the faction in Japan, were like, we need to westernize now. We need to send a bunch of people abroad. Let's go send a bunch of people to learn in the West. Any volunteers? Crickets. Nobody volunteers because almost nobody had left Japan at that point. Everybody was just oh, foreigner barbarians. It was just poorly understood sort of outside. Nobody spoke English to speak of. There was very little understanding of the outside world. So the powers that be just kept enticing more as we'll pay for them, we'll give you a stipend, etc. And eventually Sakiko's brother is no, I volunteer her. And she's wait, what? She doesn't get a say in it. So she's sent abroad along with 4 other girls. So it's you can find pictures of them. There's these 5 girls, none of whom all Japanese, really young. She is, I think, 7 or 8 at the time. The youngest was 3 or 4, and the oldest were in their teens, 13, 14. And they're all sent to the United States for education. And yeah, it's a really poorly thought out plan because they're okay, well, where are they going to go get educated? Who's going to take care of them? How are we working this out? Whatever. But it's literally they go from running around with swords in the Age of the Samurai to they're there for seeing dudes in blackface. They're there 6-7 years after the end of the Civil War. They get to see the remains of the Great Chicago Fire. They're tourists for some surprising stuff. And they end up in New England. And two of the girls just immediately, the two oldest are like, I can't deal with this, I'm out, and go back to Japan. And then the youngest three stay there for 10 years. And before she goes, Sakiko has one last sort of interaction with her mother where her mother renames her. And her mother renames her Stematsu. And Stematsu is a really odd name. There's almost nobody in Japan ever named this. And it's a weird linguistic, it has a ton of meaning if you understand a bit of Japanese. It indicates that she is waiting for her daughter to come back. It's a really sorrowful name. The character, it's two characters. There's Ste and Matsu, and Ste indicates discarding. It's when you toss something in the trash, it's steru. Whereas Matsu is a homophone for the verb to wait. But it's also the character of her defeated lord, the Aizu lord that was defeated in battle. So it's this really odd name that I've never seen before or since. And it basically was saying that she was discarding but then going to wait for her daughter. It's a really sorrowful name. So Stematsu ends up in New England, and she and the other girls can't speak any English, are terrified of everybody around them, and basically huddle together and just refuse to talk to anybody else. And eventually they're like, well, this isn't working, and they separate them into different foster families. And she goes through the education system and gradually gets better and better at it. She's like valedictorian and stuff. But the education system at the time is very... this is the early, the late 1800s. We don't even have all the states in the United States yet. She's there for a bunch of celebrations where you can see her with a bunch of flags that don't have all the stars in them. So yeah, she's there for the centennial. The education system has things in there rank all these civilizations in order of barbarism, and Japan was on it. How do you? But she does amazingly well. She's very, very bright. She ends up staying a little bit longer and becoming one of the first classes to graduate from Vassar. And she's high up, great grades and whatever. And then she goes back to Japan. However, Japan, the political winds have changed, and they're just like, oh, I don't know about all this Westerner stuff anymore. And so they're like, well, it was nice. We're going to do our own thing. They're a little bit more traditionalist at that point. And so there's no room for her or the other girls. The other girls, one of whom had just graduated high school. She was younger. And the other one didn't get a full-on bachelor's. I think she got a music degree or something. It was an associate's degree or something. So they all go back. The older one is like, I'm going to get married. It'll be fine. And Stematsu is like, no, we need to change this. This isn't okay. There's no room for us. But clearly, we've seen what can be done if you get an education, and girls don't get educated here. We need to get girls' education going. But she had no political wherewithal to do so. She was this bizarre alien in her own country. She had kept practicing Japanese while she was in the States with the other two girls, but her Japanese was stilted and weird by the time she got back. So she was still an alien in her own country. And so she really needed some sort of political power in order to pull off what she wanted to do. And she found it in a husband, but the husband, get this, was one of the military commanders who was shelling the castle. It could have killed her sister-in-law. So she had been fetching ammunition to fire at him, and he had been ordering cannons to fire at her, and they got married.
That's clearly the romance tale as old as time. Isn't that how they usually start?
It was a weird match. Her parents were like, no, we will not do this. They just flat out refused him. But he kept at it. He had spent some time abroad too, so he also kind of felt like an alien in his own country, and he was super high up in the military. And he had the attitude of I want a wife who can kind of keep keep step with me. I want a wife who's like impressive. I don't want like a trophy wife. I want a wife who can like talk and like be at these dignitary functions and can talk to people in other countries and really represent very well. And there's no like literally Shimatsu is the most educated Japanese woman in the world at this point, possibly in history. I mean, it depends on how you define education, but in terms of like traditional like college education and like liberal arts education, she knew more than any woman alive, which is crazy. So they do end up getting married, and it's a happy enough marriage. They're never really in love. Like she never really loves him. But she changes her name yet again. Like she had been born Sakiko Yamakawa, then had changed her name to Shimatsu. Her mom had. The English speakers couldn't quite like pronounce her name correctly when they looked at it. They're like Sutematsu. And they're like, so she started spelling it Stematz so people would understand it. So that's 3 name changes, and she gets married so that her last name, her surname, goes from Yamakawa to Oyama. So that's 4 name changes. So now she's Shimatsu Oyama, and Oyama literally means great mountain. So it kind of fits because she kind of devoted herself to the great mountain Fuji, like the symbol of Japan. She's gonna like make a big change in Japan, and she does. Like she manages to use her political ends to become a funder for these girls' colleges. They start one that's just for sort of nobles called the Peeresses School, and the youngest of the 3 that had gone over, a girl named Umetsuda, she's by this point gotten an education. She comes back and starts running this school, and Shimatsu like sort of has to keep in the background. She's like the patron. She's the funder. She's the one who's pulling the strings in the background. And she has a really tough life because she's still like this outsider, and there's vicious gossip going on around her. One of the great pieces of Japanese literature is basically a whisper gossip piece slamming her. Her stepdaughter had died of a Spanish flu, and they basically said it was Shimatsu's fault. And so there's this novel, I forget the name of it. It translates as a type of bird is the name of it. But it basically is her in everything but name, and it blames her as like this evil stepmom who's like corrupting her children and killing them and whatever. And she has to suffer all of this, and she does it stoically in silence and like uses all of her influence. And she writes letters back during this time saying, every year my husband gets fatter and I thinner. She really was giving everything of herself to make this happen. But it ended up working. They started a school that was the first college for Japanese girls' college. It was named after Umetsuda in time as a Tsuda college. But Shimatsu was basically the one funding it and made sure that it happened. There were edicts that each prefecture had to open up girls' schools. And the way Shimatsu died, actually, was the Spanish flu epidemic, which is a weird touch base. It's like this recurring character throughout all of human history. Like it shows up like 5 times in this book alone. The woman I just talked about, Ada Blackjack, her village had been ravaged by Spanish flu, and that's why she'd had to like move out to the big city. Like Spanish flu, it screwed everyone. So Spanish flu epidemic hits Japan, and Ume, who had been running the school, had to step down, and they didn't have a headmaster. And so Shimatsu basically stepped in and ran things for about 2 weeks, looking for a headmaster so that the school wouldn't close. And she found a headmaster, and literally the day after she found someone to take over for her, she woke up with a scratchy throat and died like 2 weeks later. So everybody remembers like Umetsuda, like she's the face of education. But there was this woman who suffered tremendously in the background, who was there for just an incredible transformation of human culture, really. Who saw just an amazing amount of stuff that her name isn't really put up nearly on the same pedestal. And she's just a fascinating character.
Yeah, there's probably no real way to measure her actual impact on the globe.
Yeah. Like she just is this background character who shows up everywhere, and she was really just trying to live a life and find a place for herself, and she just had to carve it out of granite.
Coming up, Jason is going to talk about a mother a bit of a different sort. But before we get into her story, we have to take a quick break and hear from one of the sponsors that keeps this show going.
So somebody that our listeners ask us to talk about pretty often, who we have talked about in a way already, is Marsha P. Johnson, because we talk about Marsha P. Johnson a lot in our podcast on Sylvia Rivera. They did a lot of their work together. So I wanted to take an opportunity to talk her about again today because she's in your book.
Yeah. So this is I'm going to upfront real quick discuss. So my book is called Tough Mothers, and all of the people in it are mothers of one sort or another. And the subtitle I give Marsha's chapter is The Godmother of the Trans Civil Rights Movement. Marsha's gender identity is well beyond my pay grade to actually nail down. I don't think anybody really can. I think a lot of people point her as a trans woman. She identified in several interviews as a gay man, used female pronouns, but it was also the terminology was in its nascent stages. So who really knows? Who can say? So I'm just going to leave it there. I think that it's fair to call her the godmother of the trans civil rights movement because Sylvia Rivera, I think you could agree, was like really putting in a lot of the feet on the ground work and like a lot of the building all those. Marsha was almost like the den mother, like was helping out, just looking after people. Wasn't quite as politically active. Sylvia actually offered her, I think, a president or vice president role, and she kind of declined early on. But she was there for all of it. So from the beginning, Marsha P. Johnson was this woman who lived in New York during the 1900s, was there for the Stonewall riots. I think this is where most people sort of know her from. She is credited with throwing the shot glass heard around the world. This is actually, I believe, apocryphal.
We don't actually know
Yeah.
who threw the first any particular thing, but a lot of different people get credited for it.
Yeah.
At different times.
Yeah, so people point to it. I don't think that's the case. There are a couple eyewitness accounts of her like climbing up a lamppost and like tossing a purse or something on a cop car or whatever. She was there and she was active. But yeah, who started what is still like a matter of debate that will probably never quite be untangled. So yeah. She, like so many people in STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, this group that Sylvia started, she was a sex worker who lived in New York, and she was just this incredibly cheerful presence. Many people refer to her as Saint Marsha. She would show up and give people cookies. If she had any money, she'd give it to other people. She just was this incredibly cheery, pleasant presence for most people. She had this incredible sense of style where she could just make like headdresses out of Christmas lights and whatever. There's so many great pictures of her online. She was well beloved for being in this band where she sang with a lot of energy but incredibly off key. She was just this real character that looked after everybody around there. And she'd had a real rough life. She'd struggled with mental illness for a lot of it, had been hospitalized, had been abused. I mean, you name it. She had gone through a rough life. She had gotten shot at one point. Just really, really tough stuff. But she and Sylvia sort of banded together. So whereas Sylvia was really looking at things from a more political perspective, Marsha was kind of looking after all of the other folk on the streets as like almost her wards as her kids, but wouldn't like be the first present. As you said, actually, I tend to go off in other directions. But yeah, she was there at the 1978 Gay Pride Parade. Tried keeping them out, but then in 1980, she and Sylvia were marching at the front of it, and yeah, she just sort of was a presence throughout this. She had an unfortunate end to her life that it still remains unresolved. I think there's a lot of evidence to the effect that she was basically murdered by street violence, possible act of homophobia, transphobia, but uncertain. It's still kind of up in the air. I think the police basically let it lapse for a long time and then are looking to reopen it again. At last check, but I'm actually not up to date on what is going on exactly at this moment with that.
Yeah, the last I heard, it was an unsolved crime, but widely criticized of never having been investigated as it should have been in the first place.
Yeah, they had said it as a suicide, but it almost certainly wasn't. So yeah, there's been since then a number of documentaries and stuff on her. There was one actually that came out on Netflix that was kind of roundly criticized by rather a lot of people. That the controversy is significantly complicated enough that I can't really summarize it particularly well. But I remember being like, oh, I need to do more research before I watch that. But yeah, there's been a number of people who have basically been trying to canonize her in various ways, and it's still a matter of some debate. But she was a real cheery, wonderful human being, and we're all poorer for her absence.
Yeah, I think every picture I've ever seen of her, she has this giant smile on her face. And so that's how she's portrayed in your book. She has this joyful expression, and then behind her in the picture is also Sylvia Rivera, in a kind of more defiant, militant kind of expression.
Yeah, has her fist up. Yeah, that whole picture, as with so many of the things in my book, I do a lot of research and try and put in a whole lot of different details about their lives. So behind Sylvia in that picture is the star banner, and that's actually traced from a historical star banner that they had. Marsha's outfit is legit one of the outfits that she wore in one of the parades, and the place that they're at is a park in New York that has a commemoration of the Stonewall riots there. Some statues that are also in the background, and Marsha is sort of handing out cookies. There's like a beatific light behind her as a reference to her being sort of the Saint Marsha thing. So yeah, I try to put a lot of little details in there.
Now we're going to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
I love this next one because your opener on it is, this is the true story of two vicious hellions who each ran their own crime syndicate. I mean, if that doesn't draw you in instantly, I want to talk about the women of the Sydney underworld.
Yeah.
Kate and Tilly.
Kate Lee and Tilly Devine. So they're basically like Sydney's answer to Al Capone. They were these two women who ran their own crime syndicates who hated each other. And so I sort of view this as a lot of black humor. I will say up front that what they did was no joke. Like the fights that the criminals at that point in the world were getting into, because there were no guns really in Sydney, they would fight with straight razors. They called the area that they lived in Razorhurst. Yeah, so no joke. There was a lot of really gnarly stuff going on, but these two were also just these incredibly colorful characters who were so funny. So real quick, Tilly, they both had to come from kind of abusive backgrounds. Tilly was from London. She had entered sex work when she was fairly young. In her teens. All that I could see is that she actually did it of her own volition, but this was her saying that, so it's everything's a little who knows. Had married a GI who said that who's from Australia. It was like, hey, I have a kangaroo ranch. My family has a kangaroo ranch. Come and move to Australia. Turns out that they did not have a kangaroo ranch. It was Big Jim Devine. And so she moved over and just started running a bunch of brothels. She took liberal advantage of the laws on the books that basically said that no man could run a brothel. It was like, I am no man. So she was just incredibly violent and super mean, and all of the police kind of could not stand Tilly. Kate, on the other hand, had been doing this for a bit longer, and she was more of a rum runner. She sly grog, they called it. She would basically got all around all the prohibition laws by having speakeasies and whatnot, and would deal in booze. And she was also she spent some time as a prostitute, but mostly at this point was just this funny, larger-than-life character who would wander around. She did engage in occasional violence, but mostly she was just known for going up and telling jokes. She would go into courts as just a matter of a hobby and give false testimony to try and get people. She was like, "Oh, I was there. He didn't do any of that. The cops are no good." She's like, "I don't know you. Who are you?" She would sit in the stands during the trials and just peel vegetables and heckle people. And she just, I love her. I would give a lot to have a time machine to just sit there and listen to her heckle people
while prepping the evening dinner. Apparently.
While prepping the evening dinner. One of the great anecdotes it survives from one of the police women who went after them, a woman named Maggie Baker, was that she was just. It was her first week on the job. She was just walking the area that they both sort of frequented, Razorhurst, just out on patrol. And Tilly, who the meaner one of the two, comes up and is just like, "I'm not gonna let you pass." Just gets in her face in the street. And then a random trolley goes by, and Kate Lee just sort of jumps off it and starts hitting Tilly, and holds her down and is hitting her, and just says, "Oh, go on, policewoman, you do what you need to. I got her." And an entire crowd has formed. And this is the policewoman's first week on the job. That was the tenor of stuff that they got into. They were just constantly I appear from nowhere, I jump off a trolley, and I sock you across the face. But they were just part of this incredible array of colorful characters in 1920s Sydney. There were these two guys who would always fight over this one woman. There's a guy who was a gay black man with platinum blonde hair who absolutely no book that I read identified him by his actual name. They only identified him by his epithet that everybody called him, which is a word that I cannot say on this podcast.
All right.
That I can, as a white person, I cannot say at all.
Right.
I went and did some digging. It wasn't that difficult to find this guy's actual name. His name is Alfred Barker. No books will say what the guy's actual name was. It's in the newspapers, guys. Just look it up. It's not that hard. So they continue going nuts at each other, Kate and Tilly, for a while. And then in 1929 or so, the cops kind of start cracking down. They've got this tremendous kind of overreach of policy where they're able to get in and arrest anybody who's suspected of being of bad character. And few people are worse characters than them. So they start getting arrested. Tilly spends some time in London and then comes back. And most everybody basically gets arrested. And it's just Kate and Tilly pretty much left of the old vanguard after a while because few people, the courts can't really accept that, a woman is doing this. No, they're fine, upstanding young ladies. So they then sort of switch gears and they're like, well, wait. If this whole thing is about, the premise of the law is that you have to be a person of bad character to get arrested, we'll just wage a PR campaign against each other. And so they start going after each other in the press and just talking crap about each other. And they have this whole ongoing feud, which is amazing. That spans many, many newspaper articles about Tilly's dogs. And how Kate claims that she lent her the dogs, and Tilly's like, that woman had nothing to do with my dogs, and my dogs are great. And how dare she claim credit for my dogs, which are perfect and wonderful. It's really funny.
Real Housewives levels of pettiness.
It's so petty. It is peak petty. But Kate, who's sort of naturally more ebullient, ends up winning the PR war just because she's like handing out Christmas presents and doing photo ops with Santa. Meanwhile, Tilly is doing like fundraisers for guys who've been convicted of murder.
Whoops.
Which doesn't really play as well in the press.
Optics, Tilly. Optics.
Yeah, she's not real good at that. And in the end, like they go for a while of this, but in the end, the tax man kind of gets them, and life kind of catches up with them. Tilly's image is further complicated. She had a really abusive marriage. The kangaroo farmer was a alcoholic and like really kind of dragged her name through the mud. And her divorce was just real awful and very public. And Kate was actually like surprisingly supportive of her when everybody else was sort of taking it as a sign of weakness. And anyways, the tax people came after them. They both kind of lost their fortunes and got a bit older. A new vanguard of criminals started running the place, and they were kind of old business. And so late in life, they actually have this amazing photo op that Kate put together where the two of them like sort of pose with like Kate getting totally up in Tilly's space. And Tilly's just sort of like hunched up and smoking and looking really angry. And like, whereas Kate is just like, oh, we're best friends and hugging her. It's so funny to look at. And the two died kind of later in life. They're like 60s and 70s. And they're just this fascinating chapter of Sydney history. They weren't good people, but man, they were colorful.
They were good, but they're great to hear about.
Yeah. There was a TV series that covered them called Underbelly Razor, which is I've not seen. I have heard that it's a really trashy series. It has been described to me as terabad. So yeah.
So you talk about this a little in the intro to your book, but for listeners who haven't read your book, why did you decide to focus on mothers this time?
So the origin of this, because I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I used to work at DreamWorks, and there's a simple origin story that I give of like, you know, the industry wasn't doing as well by female characters as I thought it should be, and I struck out on my own to do what the animation studios wouldn't. Rah. That's the easy thing, and that is true. But the larger story is that I had a really awesome mom, and I don't know, mom grew up in the 50s in Kentucky and didn't really have a whole lot of connection to awesome women of history. She felt like something was wrong with her because she was smart and capable, and like, you know, her mom would always tell her, men don't want a smart wife, like you should really tone it down. And I can't go back in time and give this book to her. I know that she struggled until like her 30s to really find other people like her, and that she was constantly worried that there was something anomalous or incorrect about her. And she's the most phenomenal human being in my life. And that just breaks my heart. So I can't go back in time and give this to her, but I can give this to other people who don't have that connection to all the women throughout history, which is it's dumb. It's our communal birthright. This is something that everybody should grow up with. You should know that there's all these amazing women throughout history who it's not that, you know, girls can do anything. It's they already have. Like, and here's the proof. But these stories tend to get whittled down, and so. It's part of why I did this, and then why the second volume specifically about moms is that above and beyond just sort of the stereotypes of what girls and women can be, I think that the idea of what mothers can and should be is really restrictive, and that the phrase "bad mother" is this incredibly pernicious thing that kind of haunts people. And I just wanted to show there's a great variety of mothers who've done amazing things, and that to view motherhood as this monolithic, like here's what it is to be a good mother, is really reductive. And I wanted to celebrate moms in a way that hadn't really been done. That's for many people, I think, kind of uncomfortable. Like certainly Kate Lee and Tilly Devine were not stand-up paragons of society, but I love them anyways. And they were both moms. They'd had kids the entire time they were doing all the things that I just told you. I hate it when people underestimate women. I hate it when people underestimate moms. So this was sort of for that.
I love that there's a juxtaposition to be had there. Like when you're talking about people like Kate and Tilly, who were probably rough in the classic rough, tough, and dangerous to know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that doesn't exclude the possibility that they could also be nurturing and caring. And, I think that's kind of like to me, that's what's important about these stories is that nothing is simple in life. And we tend to, like you said, be reductive and like kind of want to pare people down to the basics, but you can't erase all of it. And sometimes it is contradictory behavior, but it's important to acknowledge that that's part of being a complex human.
That's what I love about the people that I cover. I mean, I don't cover people who are simple. I try not to. I want to cover all of their messy, weird stuff. That's the stuff that I love best about them because I can't identify with people who are Pollyannas. There's a reason it's called Rejected Princesses. None of them are going to make the cut for Disney. Are you kidding?
Many, many thanks to Jason Porath for swinging by the studio. That is always such a treat.
And Tough Mothers, Amazing Stories of History's Mightiest Matriarchs is available wherever books are sold. It is an absolute delight.
Yeah, it is super duper fun. Since that episode runs a little long because we're yappy, I have the shortest of emails to share today. It is from our listener, Carrie. She writes, "Hi, longtime listener. Thank you so much for all the educating and interesting podcasts. I just bought my ticket for your Portland show this fall. Yay. Yay, we'll see you there, Carrie. I thought you would enjoy to know that my 1-year-old loves Holly's laugh, and every time Holly laughs, Winifred laughs too. Of course, I can't then help but laugh as well. Thanks and keep up the good work. That just makes me happy, so I wanted to read it. Everybody laugh more."
Yeah, I saw that email this morning, and it made me very happy. And it's got the cutest picture of a laughing baby.
Yeah, everybody laugh more. It's good for you. I'm sure some people don't like my laugh. That's fine. But I'm glad that some people do. Not everything is for everybody. But if you want to write to us, you could do so as well at historypodcast@howstuffworks.com. You can find us across the spectrum of social media as Missed in History. And if you go to missedinhistory.com, there we are, with every episode of the show that has ever existed, as well as show notes for any episodes that Tracy and I have worked on. Please join us at missedinhistory.com and chat with us. It'll be fun. And you can subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get podcasts.
For more on this and thousands of other topics, visit howstuffworks.com.